This video is based on a fictionalized interpretation of real-life events, but the story is inspired by actual occurrences, names, locations, and certain details have been altered. Prompted for storytelling or privacy purposes, the events depicted are not intended to be an exact representation, but rather a dramatized account meant for entertainment, education, and conservation purposes. Viewer discretion is advised.
I love New England. So today I'm going to take you on a trip to Cape Cod, Massachusetts in the mid to late 60s. And that was right before the likes of Charles Manson and Gary Ridgway were doing their dirty deeds. This picturesque peninsula had a perp of its own. The one and only Antone Charles Tony Costa, also known as Tony Chop Chop. That's what the locals not so affectionately called him. And he left a bloody trail. He was a gruesome fucker. And yet he is not that well known in the, to general public. I don't know why this case doesn't get passed around more often in the world of true crime. This one is near the top. But fear not, I got this. We're going to get knee deep in the story of the Cape Cod vampire. Now, out here among the picturesque lighthouses and sandy beaches, Tony plied his trade as a handyman and, check this out, babysitter. The people in Provincetown went about their day-to-day, mostly unaware of the monster in the mist, and little did they know, their daughters were in the worst kind of danger. If you want to know more about the babysitter duties, read Lisa Rodman's book. It's titled The Babysitter, My Summers with a Serial Killer. In a passage of Liza's book, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. Haven't talked to her about printing stuff. Betty, her mother, remembered things a little bit differently. And Betty said, well, I remember he turned out to be a serial killer. He wasn't your babysitter. He was the handyman. But yet in Liza's account, he had taken her and her younger sister on a car ride to a secret garden that I'm going to tell y'all about in a little bit. I think the girls were like 6 and 8 at the time. So yeah, just as we go along, keep that sort of thing in mind. Costa was born on August 2nd, 1944 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His father died during World War II as a Navy hero. He was saving another sailor from drowning and hit his head on some coral and drowned himself. Dear Mr. Costa, you were a selfless man. What happened to your son? Tony's mother, Cecilia, later remarried and gave Tony a half-brother. She passed away in 1969 of a cerebral hemorrhage, and sources say that Tony was a spoiled child. He was never disciplined. He was indulged at every turn. Now, he didn't have many friends or acquaintances, but he was known to be polite and intelligent. At some point in his life, he scored a 121 on an IQ test. At the age of 7, he told his mother about some night visions he was having. A dark figure was in his room standing by the bed. And what he told her next was so weird, disturbing, and mostly inexplicable. He pointed to a photograph of his father, a man that he couldn't possibly have a physical memory of, and said, that's the man. Yeah, a face he recognized, that was the man. This was, almost impossible. The child really didn't have a memory of him, but here's what I could also suppose. The picture being in the house and all, he'd seen it before, and being told that that was his father, he had manifested the image from that. Or this little boy was just a little bit touched. In November of 1961, as a 16-year-old, he broke into a Somerville, Massachusetts apartment. He went into the bedroom of this sleeping teenage girl and standing over her bed until her screams ran him off. And he beat feet. But he doesn't learn. 3 days later, he tried again, attempting to abduct her from the apartment building. Thank you, Jesus. There was a watchful neighbor, and that stopped. He was convicted on January 4th, 62, of unlawful entry and assault. But he got practically no punishment at all, partly due to his mother acting on his behalf. He got a suspended 1-year jail term and 3 years probation. So they slapped his wrist, but not even that hard. What he explained was it was a game the girl wanted to play. It was consensual, and she had given him a key, but somehow he seemed to lost it. Oh. Here's the part where we talk about cats. In his neighborhood, there were cats, and he had a love of taxidermy. If you loved your cat, you kept them indoors, and it was a known thing. He got married in April of 1963 to an already pregnant 14-year-old 8th grader. I'm going to need to sit with that for a minute. This marriage produced 3 children in 3 years. This ultimately buckled under the weight of his asshattery, and people say unleashed a cascade of erratic and reckless actions. Honestly, I don't think that divorce did any impact on him other than to uncumber him. And divorce wasn't going to be a bad thing for her either. I am going to intentionally leave wifey and the kids out of this article, not to avoid them, but I can't imagine what they went through. I hope they moved on with some therapy, and I will tell you that later on he did do some time for not paying his support. In June 1966, just before his divorce, he brought home 2 hippie chicks, Bonnie Williams and Diane Federoff, with the announcement that he would be driving them to Pennsylvania and then moving on alone from there to California. Later, Costa told the police that he drove the girls to Hayward, California, but they never got there. What happened to Pennsylvania? Costa surfaced at his home back in Massachusetts about 10 days later, and the girls are now believed to be his first victims. So, Provincetown was shaking the energy of that 60s counterculture. This bohemian magnetism had lured young people. These long-haired adolescents picking guitars, playing out peace and love. That was all in the streets. At the heart of this was Tony Costa. He was charismatic and always seeking out a younger crowd. He was handing out substances. I'm sure he was selling a bit, handing out a bit when it was convenient, and dispensing his own brand of wisdom, cultivating a very devoted group of young disciples that actually referred to him as sire. Yeah, sire. This seemingly devout leader, however, was simultaneously operating as a police drug informant. So he's playing both sides of the field, and I'm sure he feels he's smarter than both of them, because either one can serve a purpose until he's done with them. Well, these younger people thought he was amazing, and they were glad to have his attention. You know, a peer group of his own age would have probably thought him deathly average. In August of 1967, he went hiking with a friend named Marcia into the Truro Woods, where they had gone to feed his jazz cabbage. Costa shot this girl with an arrow in the back of her shoulder. Now, she was wearing a heavy coat. It was cold out. She was going back to the... You know, if it was that cold out, is he really still growing pot in the forest? You know, I didn't think about that till just now, and now I have to look. Okay. Anyhow, she wore a heavy coat. So she got shot, and the friend goes home and tells her mom. And Mom took her to the doctor right away. The wound was treated, and the doctor insisted on a police report. The report was made, and later, Marcia helped the police find the spot of the accident. I know you see the air quotes, accident, and told them a few things about old Tony's sick idea of intimacy that didn't happen with Marcia, but Marcia was friends with the ex-wife, and that's what she knew. He liked to do that play dead sort of stuff. Now, I know that's hearsay, but once it's out there, you can't unhear it. By 1968, his marriage was done and dusted. He drove to California, settling briefly in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, where he met and befriended Barbara Spalding. Barbara had a child that she had left with relatives, and then she vanished the same day that Costa left to return to Massachusetts. She's not been seen again, and homicide detectives now believe that he sent her to heaven as well. Once back home in Massachusetts, Tony burglarized a doctor's office that he had previously done some work for. He was a handyman, and he had done some painting and repairing around the building. Tony had been warned to stay away from the doctor's daughter, and then later the doctor had asked him just to stay away altogether. He was just creepy. But he broke in, and he stole surgical instruments and drugs. It was valued at around $5,000 then, and I looked this up. It was $47,964.29 in today's money. He was stocking up. Yeah. He and Carl had some shit in mind. Now, I hadn't mentioned Carl yet, but Carl is Tony's alter ego that he insisted forever that was a real person, but he never shows up. So, we're going to hear some more from Carl later. 18-year-old Cindy Monzon vanished from her home in Provincetown. In May of 1968, she was last seen getting into a car with Tony. That was the last anyone saw her alive. Shortly after, he and his brand new live-in lover, Susan Perry, she was 19, he called her his kid chick. Well, that situation lasted for about a week before she also disappeared on September 10th. When he was questioned about it, Costa told his friends, well, she's gone to Mexico. Okay, Tony. About mid-September, he was arrested for driving on a suspended license. He was initially pulled over for like a bad muffler or something. So later on the 25th, he was picked up again for not supporting his wife and children, and he was held in custody until November 8th. On his release, he started spending time and sharing drugs with Christine Gallant, another habitue of the counterculture. On the weekend of November 23rd, Gallant was found dead in her New York apartment, drowned in a bathtub after a barbiturate overdose. He quoted a poem from her favorite poetess, who had also left the world by choice, and he pretended for this to be a suicide note. You'll see soon that he has a thing for notes. This is what it said. When I am dead, and over me bright April shakes out her rain-drenched hair. Though you should lean above me broken-hearted, I shall not care. I shall have peace, as leafy trees are peaceful when rain bends down the bough. And I shall be more silent and cold-hearted than you are now. Wow, Tony. Cover your tracks much? There was no note. There was no note, this creepy fuck. On January 24th, 1969, Patricia Walsh and Mary Ann Wysocki disappeared on a weekend visit to Provincetown. They were reported missing just as soon as they did not show up for work on Monday. Both of them very reliable people. Patricia was a school teacher and loved her job. Teachers are pretty reliable people. And the families reported them missing. Old Tony was found in possession of their car. When questioned about it, he came up with a real sketchy bill of sale and about 3 different stories. So there he is writing up his own bill of sale. Yeah. He bought the car, thus the receipt, fake of course, and he said that he had traded it for drugs. Then the girls went to Canada. He tried to produce some evidence in his favor by sending 2 telegrams that were worded as to appear from Pat and Mary, one to himself, and then the other one was to his mother's address. Police could disprove all of this with about 1 phone call. He sent the telegrams himself. He's thinking that anything he puts on paper is instantly going to be taken as rote. Well, 2 weeks later, searchers found a woman's mutilated body near the old Truro Cemetery, and it was identified as the last mortal remains of Susan Perry. She was wearing yellow panties that said Thursday embroidered on them. That was his kid chick. Susan, I'm so sorry. Let me tell you what I know about that cemetery. It is the 2nd oldest cemetery in Massachusetts. It's called Pine Grove, and it was established around 1799. And it sits on Cemetery Road within the Cape Cod National Seashore, and it's very, very secluded. It's enclosed by granite and iron fence. You can only get in from the gravel road and like a pedestrian gate on the south side. Burial started in 1799 and continued to this day, so it's still an active and used cemetery. Let me take a quick aside here for a second. This photo and the next were taken by Judy Mole, so I want to make sure that she gets credit for her work. So thank you, Miss Judy. What I mean to say is it's very remote. You have to want to be there. Nobody just stumbles on it. Now, lean in, because this is a big one. It has what's called a holding vault. That's a place where a body in a casket can be held until the graveside services. And it was reported that this holding vault was where Tony did the dismemberment. Oh, that's shiversome. On March 4th, the dismembered bodies of Walsh, Wasaki, and Sidney Monzon were found buried together 1.5 miles from the first gravesite. Walsh and Wasaki had both been shot in the head. That caused their death. The dismemberment was after the fact. Allegedly, the hearts were removed from all 3 victims, and allegedly, the remains bore human teeth marks. The coroner also discovered evidence of necrophilia. I'm not going to explain that. I'm not going to ruin your childhood. It's awful. Investigators learned that Walsh and Wasaki had met Antone Costa in Provincetown. I think it said that they were boarding at the same boarding house or guest house that he was staying at the time. Okay, so when he was found in possession of the car, he said that they had left for Canada. He had also asked the body shop how much to paint the car, and when he couldn't afford it, he abandoned the car near his kill zone. For a smart guy, Tony is stupid. With friends that had traveled to Mexico and then to Canada, he hangs around with some well-traveled people, don't he? So Susan Perry had disappeared the previous Labor Day. When her body was found, she had been cut into 8 pieces and was considerably decomposed. A month later, police found the head and torso of Wasaki in a large hole not far from a cleared spot that Tony had not once grown asparagus. Not long after that, the rest of Wasaki's body and the corpse of Walsh were discovered. The bodies had been mutilated with a knife, and although they had apparently died from gunshot wounds, the dismemberment was after the fact. Underneath them was the dismembered remains of Miss Sidney Monzone. Now, what had led the authorities to the woods in the first place was the discovery of an abandoned Volkswagen van that belonged to Walsh. And there was a note on the windshield that said something like, "Broke down, be right back." Again, Tony with the notes. Not far from the VW was a torn cover of the owner's manual, and the police did laboratory tests and identified Costa's fingerprints on that cover, and that's what tied him to the area. That and Marcia, the arrow victim, had taken them there after her incident. Well, let me tell you a little bit about eliminators that use dismemberment as part of their signature. There are three types that come to the top. Those familiar with dismemberment, like doctors and butchers. Those who had a past trauma fueled by repressed rage. And those experiencing a psychotic break in an uncontrolled episode and desperate to hide the body. So our Tony wasn't doing anything but trying to hide his own guilt. This was for his gratification. And I think, but I'm no expert, that this was sort of a vengeance kind of thing from a past trauma, probably from women, maybe a mom thing, but who knows? When I find out, I'll let you know. Well, he was arrested on suspicion of murder after detectives learned that this private garden was used for stashing substances, growing his jazz cabbage. He was growing enough for his own use and to sell a little bit. I wonder how many people have coughed down the ganja that was grown on a corpse. Well, while in custody, our suspect changed his story several times, as he does, twice implicating innocent friends, and then Carl. Here comes Carl again in the murders. Well, Carl never showed up, ever. He repeatedly failed polygraph exams. Now, I don't know how much stock you put in polygraph, and that's open to personal belief. I'm epileptic, so they don't work on me. There's just so many factors in play with all of us. I don't trust him, but if you were asked to take one, would you? On his first psychiatric exam on March 31st, it resulted in a diagnosis of schizoid personality. You think? 3 months later, a second psychiatrist characterized Costa as a modern-day Marquis de Sade, a sexually dangerous man capable of taking lives. Well, the floodgates opened July 12, 1969, when Costa finally confessed to the murder of Mary Wasaki. Costa's trial opened on May 6, 1970, ending in the conviction of 4 murders. Now, when a reporter asked if this was the work of the Cape Cod vampire, District Attorney Edmund Dennis nodded, and with that, the media storm became a freaking hurricane. His statement was, the hearts of each girl had been removed from the bodies and were not in the graves, nor were they found. A razor-like device was found near the graves. Each body was cut into as many parts as there are joints. Dennis also went on to say that teeth marks had been found on the bodies. Now, while all this hot air makes for great copy, it was for the most part untrue. I mean, why do you need to embellish something that's bad enough already? But it had earned Costa his moniker, the Cape Cod Vampire. And I guess that's better than Tony Chop Chop. But the hearts had not been removed, although some of the organs were missing from at least one of the bodies. No cutting device had been found, and the remark about as many body parts as joints was total hyperbole. I don't even think that's physically possible. But only the necrophilia was true. Dennis managed to transform the murders into an international story. Now, press from all over descended like vultures on Cape Cod. The press was bad, said Chief of Police Berrio, but the tourists are even worse. Costa's garden became a tourist trap, and I think I hear that that's something that happens still today. Curiosity seekers were tromping through the Truro woods, hoping to find the graves, or worse, they were looking for body parts. So there's that, and the rumors of satanic worship, which persist to present day. So Costa was tried and convicted in 1970. His lawyer attempted to paint him as a psychotic, mentally insane, not in control of himself. But Costa was having none of that. He took the stand in his own defense. Stupid for him, best for us. No one can speak for a narcissist as well as they can speak for themselves. So he took over and gave a speech to the jury trying to impassion them, kind of soften them up, kind of charming them. But not only did the jury not buy it for a skinny minute, so they found him completely, totally, and terminally, absolutely sane. So his day in court went something like this.
White male necrophiliac. Cannibal Anton Costa, convicted of murdering 2 young women, received a life sentence in 1970. His appeal, arguing insanity due to drug abuse and the horrific nature of the crimes, failed. While defense psychiatrists cited incapacity, prosecution experts countered with a personality disorder diagnosis. Ultimately, the court upheld the convictions, citing sufficient evidence of premeditation, despite some medical ambiguity regarding his sanity. The defendant was convicted of 2 first-degree murders. The judge correctly refused jury instructions on manslaughter. There was no evidence of provocation, accident, or diminished capacity rising to the level of legal insanity. The court also properly rejected instructions on the defendant's drug-induced insanity, despite extensive medical testimony on the defendant's drug use. Review under GLC 278, Section 33E, affirmed the convictions. Substantial evidence supported the guilty verdicts. Indictments were filed April 8, 1969.
Sentenced to life imprisonment, Tony began his new normal by stocking his cell with books on ritual magic and the occult, including a copy of Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. Now, let's not read too much into that. The book isn't even particularly well written. I've read it because a lot of serial killers seem to be into it, and I needed to know. But what it explains is that there is no afterlife, and sin is a part of being human, so why not embrace it? And that seems to be just what Costa needed to hear. So Costa never confessed to the killings unless you subscribe to Daniel Webster's belief that suicide is confession. The closest he came to admitting his involvement in the deaths of these 4 women was in Resurrection. He called this a factual novel about the killings that he had written while in prison. According to Resurrection, Costa did not commit the murders. Responsibly for their deaths fell to Carl, the alter ego. Carl allegedly shot Marianne Wasaki and Patricia Walsh in the Truro woods. Susan Perry and Sidney Monzon supposedly died of drug overdoses, one in the woods and the other in Carl's apartment. Address to Carl's apartment was never given. Both were dismembered after their deaths, Costa claimed, and later buried. In the case of the latter two women, Costa's novel claimed that he had no involvement in their deaths other than the knowledge that they had happened. Some of the details were unearthed through hypnosis, and again, I leave you to your own beliefs about what hypnosis can do. Although he was never linked to other than the four bodies of those women, it is believed that he maybe had as much as 16. But neither he or Carl ever mentioned that. In 1969, Life magazine published an essay later collected in Wampeteers, Foma, and Granfalloons by Kurt Vonnegut, who was a Cape Cod resident at the time, and he explored Costa's acts, drawing parallels to Jack the Ripper. If you look at my video about the Thames Torso mystery, you'll find more connection there than with the Ripper, but I digress. Vonnegut's fascination also stemmed from a personal connection, and this is getting creepy. His then 19-year-old daughter, Edith, had an encounter with Costa during the summer, developing some familiarity with him. She knew who he was. Vonnegut's account, called There's a Maniac Loose Out There, was a title from a statement by Costa himself. Following his usual pattern, Costa had extended an invitation to Edith, just like the others, to go out to this hidden garden. Thankfully, she declined. She was definitely his type, a pretty young girl out for an adventure. And some sources say that it was by Vonnegut's influence that Costa wrote his book. On Sunday, May 12, 1974, Tony Costa was found dead in his cell at the age of 29. Was it murder or suicide? Reports go either way. Some say it was impossible for him to do what he did to himself, but we're never going to know, and sources go back and forth in both directions. But here's what the official report said.
Walpole corrections officer making a routine tear check at 8:10 p.m. discovered Antone Costa hanging by the neck from a woven leather belt knotted around the upper bars of his cell. Costa's eyes bulged open. His darkly modeled face was frozen into a grotesque mask. Blood foamed against his gaping lips from his having bitten his tongue nearly in half. One unlaced sneaker had been kicked off during his death struggles, revealing a mended white sock. Costa Bad urinated down the front of his unpressed prison trousers. Medical examiner Harold L. Schenker certified that Antone Charles Costa had died of asphyxiation by hanging, indicating suicide. He was 29 years old.
Tony Costa is buried in Provincetown in an unmarked grave next to his mother. There are those today who still remember him. Some believe he was innocent, and the real killer has never been captured. So, in closing, noodle this one out with me for a minute. Was he doing the drugs to alter his consciousness for the sake of Carl? Or maybe to protect himself from Carl? Was it easier to communicate with Carl in an altered state? I have so many questions about Carl. So many questions. But my loves, that's it for me this week. Sweet dreams. I'll see you next time.